take you through some facets of this journey into the metalworking traditions of the Kammalar and Vishwakarma communities of southern India. And I will just proceed to share my screen now. Is that visible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. The Kammalar and Vishwakarma of southern India represent age-old artisanal communities who have left behind an indelible imprint in terms of material culture and metals heritage. However, although the artistic legacy of temple sculpture and metal icons is generally known, there are lacunae in terms of a finer appreciation of the wider milieu of the metal crafts, the technocultural aspects, the living heritage of the knowledge systems, and the intertwinings with the socio-cultural aspects. And I must qualify here that my study focuses mainly on approaches and findings from original fieldwork with respect to ethnometallurgical and archaeometallurgical documentation of fading practices, rather than the studies based on texts in epigraphical or inscriptional sources, or on social anthropological approaches and social history and so on, which has been covered in some detail and very competently by several other scholars. So the book monograph comprises some 250 pages with 250 photographs and sets out to chart the trajectories of important craft traditions in various parts of southern India, ranging from the copper alloy repertoire of the making of metal icons, bells and vessels and symbols and so on, to the ferrous repertoire of blacksmithy and the legacy of wood steel, to explore the broader intertwinings of culture and technology. India and especially in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, the communities were also known by different names such as Kammalar, Panchala, Achari, Shilpachari, Anjanatar, and so on, analogous to the fivefold clans. And the once powerful fivefold kinship of the Kammalar had spread also to Ceylon, Burma, and Java, according to Ananda Kumaraswamy. The five occupational groups, known by their Tamil names as Tattar goldsmiths, Kannar bronze workers, Tachar carpenters, Kal Tachar stonemasons, and Kollars or Kollans or blacksmith, were classified as Kammalar or Panchala. And in Sri Lanka as well, some of these Tamil nomenclatures are found. Of course, some of the Vishwakarma and Kammalar communities in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu envisage their status as being on par or even superior to the priestly community of Brahmins on the basis of the origin from Parabrahman or Virata Vishwakarman as the creator, and regard themselves as Vishwa Brahmins. Thus, as pointed out by Kumaraswamy and other scholars, often the Panchala performed priestly rites in connection with consecration of images and were accorded certain special privileges, taking on the role of Brahmin priests in such rituals. But it must be mentioned that whereas in actual practice, the fivefold groupings of craftspeople were not uniformly accorded a privileged position in the overall scheme of caste and social hierarchies, and with some facets of discriminations as also indicated in inscriptional and anthropological studies by various scholars. But what makes the narrative of the Kammalars so compelling is the innovative ways in which they sought to negotiate, subvert, or reposition themselves in terms of social stratification through their origin myths, rituals, and worldviews. The medieval Chola inscriptions give some insights into the social milieu of the Kammalar community and throw some light on their struggles for social enhancement of their positions. For example, with the subdivisions into the left-handed and right-handed castes, with the former being less privileged than the latter. The Kammala Rathakara are also mentioned in the 12th century inscription of Tiruvarur of Tanjavur district, where the Rathakara conveys the itinerant nature also related to the processional chariot. Bertenstein had reported that the Kammalars are sons of the Kshatriyas fathers and Vaishya mothers, i.e. the warrior and merchant caste respectively, suggesting some of these mobilities in terms of the social constructs. A Tamil inscription of Rajaraja Cholan of the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu mentions land grants of the 11th century, whereby one brazier or kannan was assigned one share of land, and for one master carpenter, 1.5 share. In recent times, however, in the Tanjavur district and elsewhere, the Kammalar referred to bronze and bell metal workers, and the metal icon makers are known as tapatis, which is also the term used to describe the stone masons and the stone icon makers. Many of the cultural hubs where metal artisanship developed lie close to riverine ecosystems to be able to avail of the alluvial molding clays as seen in the Kaveri region. The image of Vishwakarma made by the traditional icon makers of Srikanta Sthavati and the family of Swami Malai, which lies on the banks of the Kaveri, 4 kilometers from Kumbakonam, is seen in this slide, and they're a very eminent and renowned master craftspeople. Well, Chola inscriptions describe South Indian bronzes as Sheppu Tirumani, or copper images of the Lord. And the Brihadishwara temple of the 11th century, built by Rajaraja Cholan at Tanjavur, had no less than 60 metal icons according to inscriptions, of which only 2 are now extant. And one is, of course, of Adavalan or Nataraja, the family deity or Kula Devata of the Cholas, along with the consort Shivakami. And typically, a lot of lamps and so on were also donated to the temples for the worships. And inscriptions mention the 400 dancers attached to the temples, who were also the donors of lamps and such like, the Devadasis and the Nachiyar, along with the queens or Nampiratiyar and the ruling elite and the royal patrons. Now, although images of craftspeople themselves are scarcely depicted in ancient India, there is a rare metal image portraying the stone mason Brahmadirayar in the Tanjavur Art Gallery, who built a fortification wall around 11th century Brihadishwara temple, which indicates the reverence in which he was held. Well, the most spectacular Chola bronze is of Nataraja, the Hindu god of Shiva as lord of dance. Now, one should also mention that the Nataraja image also comes into vogue in the Adithurai temple built by Sembiyan Mahadevi in terms of the stone form of the early 10th century. And this temple also has a bronze image of Nataraja. And there is also a very fine bronze in the Freer Gallery of Art, which has been thought by some scholars to represent the widowed queen Sembiyan Mahadevi, under whom the Nataraja image also came widely into vogue. Now, one should also mention that there is an inscription in Aduthurai, this temple built by this remarkable Chola Dowager Queen, Sembiyan Mahadevi, in the 10th century, which mentions that the Kammalar community were the left-hand Vaishnavas. And there is also a stone sculpture of the architect Sattan Gunabhattan, which is found in the 10th century Uma Maheshwara temple at Koneri Rajapuram, also erected by Sembiyan Mahadevi. However, we don't see too many examples of inscriptions related to individual metal icon makers, although, of course, there are inscriptions mentioning donors of images and lamps and so on. The age-old process of lost wax casting of metal icons survives in Swami Malai, 4 kilometers from Kumbakonam, and you're looking here at some images from the metal icon casting foundry of Swami Malai, the atelier of Devasena Sthapati and his sons, Radha Krishna Sthapati, who is seen here at work making a wax model of a Nataraja image to be cast. And typically, the techniques of measurement used the Talamana cannon and the Odiole or the palm leaf. And the Talamana cannon are also described in the Silpa Shastras. And the lost wax process is mentioned as Madhu Chehista Vidhana in the Silpa Shastras. And here the wax model is covered by numerous layers of clay, alluvial clay from the Kaveri delta to make the mold. And then the mold is heated under numerous layers of cow dung cakes or the ratis so that there's complete uniform heating of the mold so that the wax is then expelled out and then the molten metal is poured into the mold. Now, there is also a lovely metaphorical reference to the casting process in the poetry of Andal, the 9th century mystic woman saint and devotee of Vishnu. In her well-known composition, the Nachiyar Tirumori, she likens the downpour of rain from clouds to the metaphor of the release of wax from the mold in the process of metal casting and evokes Krishna as a skilled craftsman. And she writes, "My beautiful love, it is as if he has put clay around me and poured wax into the heart." And in fact, the mold itself is described as karu in Tamil, which is a reference to the womb. So there is this analogy with the birthing process.